Don't you need to? Back in your arms of a good friend. Oh, sneakily move. Shut up, calling your girlfriend.
What's happening, guys? Cooper Carter here for G66, and on this week's Fractal Friday, we're diving into the single amplifier model type that I turn to most often, pretty much regardless of what style of music I'm being called on to play. It is an exceptionally versatile amp type based on a real-world amplifier that many have referred to as being almost impossible to make sound bad. Earlier this year, I got the call to play lead guitar for a one-off gig with one of my all-time favorite musical artists, one of my greatest songwriting heroes, the legendary power pop king, Matthew Sweet. Now, anyone familiar with Matthew's music, whether early fans from his 90s ascension to power pop kingdom, or more recent fans from his inclusion in 2006's Guitar Hero 2, with his song Girlfriend, which you heard in the intro to this video, knows that stepping into the lead guitar position means filling some pretty big shoes. It is a pretty daunting proposition to capture the wild, frenetic guitar playing of Robert Quine and Richard Lloyd, quickly switch to the biting, jangling rhythm guitar tones of either Matthew or Lloyd Cole, and then also cover some of the steel parts played on Matthew's albums by the absolutely legendary Greg Leitz. So to tackle this challenge, I turned to an amplifier type that I'm not only very familiar with, but I also consider to be, if not the most versatile amplifier in the Fractal Audio suite, then certainly one of the most versatile from an incredibly long list of Fractal Audio models. The AC20, based on, of course, the Morgan AC20. Now, anybody who's watched some of my videos before or students of my masterclass know my love of this amp very well. And if you do want to get the absolute most out of your Fractal Audio Systems unit, whether that is the Axtex 3, the FM9, or the FM3, do make sure to visit classes.coopercarter.com to enroll in the complete Fractal Audio Masterclass series. The AC20 is in many ways the perfect amplifier, especially if you're the type of player that needs to cover a lot of ground in one gig, if you love the sound of Class A amps, the 60s British sound, and if you want an amplifier that can go from incredibly clean to extremely mean very, very easily. The AC20 is also honestly obscenely touch sensitive, which makes it one of my favorite amplifiers to run quite hot, but then use a lot of volume knob adjustment on the fly to get a ton of different sounds, different tones, and a lot of different dynamics without even touching a pedal. But of course, the amplifier also excels at being a pedal platform. So I'm on the FM3 for this video, but as with almost all of the Fractal Friday videos, all of these methods and techniques are applicable to really any of the Fractal units in this current generation. And as some of you have mentioned in comments, a lot of this stuff is relevant to the Axvex 2 and even the Standard and the Ultra. There's been a lot of consistency in how Fractal units actually work. So let's talk about the AC20 here. In the Axvex and the FM3 and the FM9, this current generation of products, we have 4 separate types of AC20. There's the AC20 12AX7 bass and treble, and the AC20 EF86 bass and treble. Let's talk about that for a second. As you can see in the editor, we really only have 3 controls specific to this amp: the gain knob, the high cut, and then the bright switch. So on the real world amplifier, you've got a power knob, which allows the amp actually to run from anywhere from a quarter watt all the way up to 20 watts. So you get a huge amount of range on where you can play this in a bedroom or a big stage. You've got the high cut knob, which of course cuts out the highs from the power section. And then you've got the volume knob, which in our Fractal world is this gain knob. You then have 2 switches. You've got the bright switch, which is modeled on in all 4 of the units in the Fractal. You could, of course, switch this off if the amp is a little too bright, or just dial in some high cut, which is what I tend to do. And then you have this really fun bass and treble clef switch. I really love how Morgan has done the actual graphics there. But that bass treble switch is not modeled in the Fractal as a switch. It is, in fact, separated out into these bass and treble models. The dual channel version of the AC20 also allows you to switch the preamp tubes from EF86s to 12AX7s, which drastically changes the character of the amp. So you have the 2 models for each of those 2 different tube types. Let's start with this AC20 EF86. I'm going to select here in my cab picker. I'm going to search AC, and I'm going to go with this AC20 Deluxe 57A. I'm going to turn on a second IR, and I'm going to search AC again. And I really like the sound of this 160. So let's go ahead and see what I get right out of the box. No changes at all. This is everything at default. And that's my Ernie Ball Music Man Cutlass on single coils, which is pretty vintage voiced. Let's kick up to the humbucker on the Cutlass HSS, which again is a fairly mid-gain humbucker, but we get this. I'm going to go ahead and turn our level up just a bit. What makes this amp so special is just how dynamic it is. Now, for comparison's sake, this is the amp with the treble switch activated. Let's hear this same preamp tube with the bass switch on. A little more weighty, a little darker, of course, but the really special difference comes in just how much this amp changes when we swap the tubes over from EF86s to 12AX7s. I'm going to turn the gain on this amp up to about 3/4 of the way up, which is where I really like to run it. That's the EF86 treble. Check out the 12AX7 treble. A lot more sparkle, but also much lower gain. So if we crank the amp all the way up, that's where we're sitting with the 12AX7s. With the EF86 though, the amp is just absolutely ripping. Now, here's the thing. This is what makes this amp so special to me. This is with my volume knob all the way up on a humbucker guitar. I'm going to put my volume knob down at half. And here's what we get. Or I could switch over to a single coil, and we immediately, again, remember, this is what the amp sounds like. Switching over to a single coil, we get this with my volume knob around 6. Add in a little reverb so we don't all go crazy here. Anybody who watches my videos knows I'm a big fan of recording Studio C, and we very quickly just go from this big rock amp to like a bluesy John Mayer thing with just a little roll of my volume knob down from 10 to 7. So of course, this amp is my go-to for anything edge of breakup. I'll turn my volume knob down even further, so let's go down to like 4 and get a beautiful glassy clean. Let's add a little bit of delay here, and we'll just go with the digital stereo. I'm not going to make a whole lot of adjustments here, other than perhaps to bring this down around 300. Add a little bit of chorus. And very quickly, if we turn off the chorus, you immediately have kind of U2 territory. And remember, this is an amp that we currently have dimed at 10 that sounds like this with my volume knob all the way open. Now, I would probably dial a little bit of high cut in here just to peel off a little bit of those highs, make it a little smoother. And then if we want to get a little advanced, I don't want to get too crazy here. I always love to put a little bump around 1200, depending on what you're playing, maybe 800. If you've watched my videos before, you've seen me do this. Just widen that just a little bit. This is especially for that edge of breakup stuff. So let's take the amp out of ridiculous territory down to where I would usually run it. Really just tons of sparkle. Really clean up over here. Just again, pulling the volume knob back just 2 points maybe. We haven't even gotten into, though, how incredible this amplifier becomes when you add a little bit of drive in front of it. I'm going to go ahead and add a drive pedal. And let's go with the Klon Chiron, which is, of course, based on the legendary, and some might say overrated, but I think it sounds pretty great, Klon Centaur, the amplifier without it. Kick it on, and this amp just turns into a completely different beast. Let's pull this gain up a little bit and crank the level, and we've taken an incredibly dynamic mid-gain amplifier and turned it into something that, honestly, we're not that far off from. I mean, if we were to go with a drive pedal that's a little bit more ridiculous, like, I don't want to go totally crazy and say the Metal Zone, but sure, why not? Let's try it. We get this. But when you pair a drive pedal that is itself as dynamic as the Klon Chiron with the amp that we're using here, which is itself very dynamic, you get, again, at the top of your volume knob, a really just rip and gain machine. I mean, I've used this for cover gigs at pretty much at these exact same settings, and tell me this doesn't sound pretty damn good. So again, top of the volume knob, having a little fun there. But let's roll down halfway. Turn off all this stuff. Unbelievable dynamics. I mean, that is an incredible amount of range there. And also, shout out to Fractal Audio, of course, the most dynamic, most realistic models on the planet. There is no other modeler, you can take that to the bank, that's going to do this at the top of the volume knob. And then also has not only the component quality inside the unit, hardware, but also the software algorithms to take you to this at the bottom of the volume knob. I mean, come on, just beautiful. Now, of course, given that this is Fractal Land and we have 4 channels on each of our amplifier blocks, we could copy this channel to channel B and go over and switch out our tube type to the 12AX7. And then we'd have, let's turn off this drive, then we'd have the ability to switch between the more overdriven and the less overdriven. So with the same settings on the amp, other than switching those tubes out, a lot of guys, Morgan players in the physical amp world, use this to switch between humbucker and single coil guitars and get the same sound simply by switching that tube switch. We have the power to do that just with channels, and we could fill out these other 2 channels with versions of this amplifier. For example, running one extremely hot and then running one all the way down. Let's check out, though, since we have been running fairly hot on this amp, just how nice it is when we run it really, really low. And again, don't be afraid to run these knobs anywhere that sounds good to you. Use your ears, not your eyes. There's no reason not to run this amp at 1.25 if that's what you want to do. I'm going to turn this high cut down. I'm going to take our volume up so that we can hear a little bit better. But with a single coil, listen to how beautiful this is. I mean, come on. So spanky. And if we put a compressor in front of it, it's just going to get ridiculously spanky. I mean, dynamic comp, my favorite, add a little bit of compression. I mean, this is just incredible. I mean, for funk. But at these levels, you could also just get an incredibly beautiful atmospheric sound. Let's switch over to a more expansive reverb, maybe let's say the Strato Cumulus. And I mean, come on. It does not get much prettier than that. And now again, this amp is running almost all the way down now. Let's kick on this drive pedal. Ooh, I forgot I had that reverb on. That's pretty fun. Let's go back to our studio though. Very Mike Campbell sounding, getting into petty territory. And then we crank the amp up just a little bit here. And we've got a very nice Brian May kind of Queen thing. Outside of a super hardcore gent or really, dedicated metal band, there really isn't any territory you can't cover here. We've done U2, we've done Petty, we've done Queen. This is like the praise and worship amp. We can do John Mayer type stuff here. We could do SRV. Let's just crank this up a little bit. I mean, not exactly nailing that riff as well as I'd like, but hey, it's first thing in the morning. So I hope that I've shown you just how dynamic this amp can be. And for the Matthew Sweet gig that you saw in the intro, I really just ran this model, the EF86 treble, which I prefer because it does have a little bit more gain on tap. And I do hope I've demonstrated that even with the gain very high, you get a huge range of tones just with your volume knob. I mean, here it is on 3 and I'm slamming it as hard as I can. I would run the amp about here. I think that's about where I had it for this gig. You get that classic, great rhythm tone, punchy. One of my all-time favorite Matthew tunes, Divine Intervention off the Girlfriend album. If you don't know it, check it out. There's some fantastic playing there. Of course, also the iconic intro to Girlfriend. And then I simply kicked on the Klon for lead. And going back to what I mentioned before, given that this pedal and this amp are so dynamic, for some of the tunes, like for example, Sick of Myself, I would just leave the drive pedal on and get a big fat rhythm close to the top of the volume knob. Then I'd have a really fat lead. And then on the verses, when I'd be playing the same rhythm part, but I wanted to back off a little bit, just roll the knob down. Go ahead and add back in that chorus for you guys and the compression. And I will just save this preset out. And as always, the preset will be available to download at the link in the video description. I'm gonna go ahead and put this guy back at 333, turn on this comp, and I mean, come on, this is instant access right here. Or my personal favorite. Actually going to change this chorus before I save this preset for you guys to the Dimension 2 because I just can't get enough of the Dimension 2. I'm going to up the depth a little bit. I hope I've demonstrated what an incredibly versatile amplifier this is. I turn to it for a ton of gigs. Again, really everything from the cleanest to the meanest. There are, of course, better amplifiers out there for getting a nice, tight metal tone, but this one could also be made to do it if you really want to just stick with one model for a gig. I can't think of a better amplifier type in the Fractal unit to do more work, which is why you find the physical real-world version, the Morgan AC20, on a lot of stages for late night shows. A lot of session guys use it. Anybody who's really trying to cover a lot of tonal ground with just one amplifier. And of course, it is a darling of pedal lovers because it takes just about any pedal you throw at it while remaining incredibly, incredibly dynamic. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please do make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to G66's channel and leave me a comment in the comment section below, letting me know what you would like to see on a future Fractal Friday. I have some very special artist tone tours coming up in the next several weeks that I am very excited to share with you all. So stay tuned for those. And if you'd like to see the full videos of the songs that I played with Matthew at that one-off show a few months ago, I'll be posting those very soon on my channel, youtube.com/Cooper Carter. There will be a button to get to that channel at the end of this video, as with all Fractal Fridays. Remember, if you guys want to get the absolute most out of your Fractal audio systems unit, whether that is the Axe 3, the FM9, or the FM3, make sure to visit classes.coopercarter.com for my complete Fractal Audio Masterclass series. And for all things Fractal Audio, keep it right here on G66, and I will see you guys very soon on Fractal Friday.